I don't do petty. I do permanent. The rain hammers against the bulletproof glass of the secured Navy conference room in Norfolk, Virginia. It's past midnight, and the only sound louder than the storm is the weight of betrayal hanging in the air like smoke. Lieutenant Antonia Brooks, 63 years old with a steel spine forged in Queens, slides a sealed evidence pouch across the polished mahogany table. Her dress blues are tailored sharp enough to cut glass. Inside that pouch are missile schematics that could sink nations. Commander Miriam Cho, from counterintelligence, doesn't touch the evidence. She just stares at it like it might explode. Two stone-faced military police officers stand at attention by the door, their hands resting on their sidearms. The air in this room tastes like metal and broken trust. Cho finally breaks the silence. "Who retrieved these, Lieutenant?" Her voice carries the kind of authority that makes admirals sweat. Antonia's dark eyes flick toward the door where Anthony Hale waits in handcuffs. 34 years old, handsome as a recruiting poster, and already looking like a man who knows his world is crashing down around him. Nobody breathes. For 23 years, Antonia treated Anthony like the son she never had. She pushed for his promotions, shared classified intelligence about upcoming campaigns, and trusted him with the crown jewel of naval warfare technology, an advanced submarine missile system that could change the balance of power in the Pacific. She even assigned him to manage the entire project. That trust cost her everything. Antonia's Queens-born cadence cuts through the tension like a blade. "Next time I'm bringing cannoli, not felonies." It's the kind of dry humor that only comes from a woman who's seen too much and survived it all. But Commander Cho isn't laughing. She leans forward, and there's something in her eyes that says she knows more than she's letting on. "Lieutenant Brooks, how exactly did these documents find their way back to us?" The question hangs in the air like a loaded gun. Because 3 weeks ago, Anthony Hale made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't just steal classified weapons documentation from Antonia's project. He sold it to Russian intelligence operatives in exchange for a briefcase full of cash and promises of a fast-track promotion in a foreign navy. The plan was simple: take the money, disappear to Europe with his wife Sarah, and start fresh with enough classified secrets to buy a mansion in Switzerland. What Anthony didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just his wife. She was an undercover intelligence officer working for the same Russian handlers he'd been feeding information to. And what none of them knew was that Lieutenant Antonia Brooks doesn't forgive. She calculates. When Anthony starts to speak from the doorway, his voice cracks like a teenage boy's. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to." Antonia doesn't even turn to look at him. Her voice could freeze fire. "You meant every inch, son." That word son hits Anthony like a physical blow. Because for 8 years, that's exactly what he was to her. The child she mentored, protected, and loved like family. Until he put a price tag on that love and sold it to the highest bidder. Commander Cho opens a second evidence pouch, and the contents spill across the table like pieces of a broken life. A burn phone with text messages in Cyrillic script. $50,000 in cash, still wrapped in Russian banking bans. And a train ticket to Paris purchased under Sarah Petrov, Anthony's wife's maiden name. The name she never told her husband. She still used for certain transactions. Anthony's knees buckle. The MPs catch him before he hits the floor. "How did you know?" Cho asks Antonia, but there's respect in her voice now. The kind of respect reserved for operators who work in shadows and never leave fingerprints. Antonia's fingers drift to the chain around her neck, where a wedding band catches the fluorescent light. It's not her ring. It belonged to her late husband, Marcus Brooks, a naval intelligence officer who died in the line of duty 7 years ago. What Anthony never knew, what nobody knew, was that Marcus Brooks didn't really leave the Navy when he died. He left behind something far more valuable than a pension or a flag-draped coffin. He left behind a network. A high-level intelligence operation embedded so deep in military structures that it had tentacles reaching into every major naval installation from San Diego to Norfolk. Assets in places Anthony could never imagine. Watching everything, reporting everything, protecting the very institution he'd chosen to betray. When Anthony started making his deals with Russian operatives in seedy hotel bars across Virginia Beach, Marcus's network was watching. When Sarah began funneling classified information through encrypted channels, they were recording every transmission. When the couple made plans to disappear to Europe, they were already 3 steps ahead. Antonia spent 3 weeks playing chess while Anthony played checkers. She watched him destroy himself from the inside out, knowing that the most permanent revenge isn't the kind that happens fast and loud. It's the kind that happens slow and complete. Commander Cho's voice cuts through Antonia's memories. "Lieutenant, I need to know how you got ahead of Russian intelligence handlers operating on American soil." Antonia's gaze drops to her husband's wedding ring, then rises to meet Cho's eyes with the kind of intensity that could melt steel. "Because my husband never really left the Navy." The lights cut to black. 2 years earlier, Naval Station, Norfolk, Virginia. The sun barely kisses the horizon as Lieutenant Antonia Brooks walks through her mentorship office, coffee steam rising from her mug like morning prayers. The walls are covered with photos of sailors she's guided through the ranks, young faces that trusted her with their futures. She doesn't know it yet, but she's about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Anthony Hale sits across from her desk, 26 years old, with the kind of hungry ambition that either builds legends or destroys them. His uniform is pressed sharp enough to slice paper, and his eyes hold that same fire Antonia remembers from her own early days in the Navy. "Tell me about South Carolina," she says, settling into her chair. Anthony's face lights up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Grew up in Charleston, ma'am. Mom worked double shifts at the shipyard. Dad wasn't around much, but she made sure I knew the water was in my blood." Antonia nods slowly. She sees herself in this young man, the relentless work ethic, the hunger to prove something to a world that expects you to fail, the way he carries himself like he's got nothing to lose and everything to prove. "You remind me of someone I used to know, kid." The word slips out before she can stop it. Kid. Anthony's entire face transforms, like she just handed him the keys to the kingdom. That smile should have been a warning. 3 days later, Antonia storms into Lieutenant Commander Armand Ortega's office like a woman on a mission. Ortega is the program lead for Aegis Sea Shade, the Navy's most classified submarine missile upgrade program, the kind of project that could reshape naval warfare in the Pacific. "I want Anthony Hale on Sea Shade," she says, without preamble. Ortega looks up from his files, eyebrows raised. "Brooks, the kid's got 6 months of active duty under his belt. He's green as spring grass." So was I before someone opened a door. Antonia plants her hands on his desk, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that has made admirals reconsider their positions. This program needs fresh eyes and hungry minds. Anthony's got both. Ortega studies her for a long moment. He's known Antonia for 15 years, watched her turn struggling sailors into decorated officers. When she believes in someone, mountains tend to move. "You're willing to stake your reputation on him?" "Already am." Later that afternoon, Chief Denise Crawford finds Antonia at the pier, watching submarines slice through the dark water like metal sharks. Dee's been Antonia's closest friend since they were both ensigns, and she has the kind of blunt honesty that cuts through military protocol like a hot knife through butter. "You're building a navy out of strays again," Dee says, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. Antonia's laugh carries across the water. Strays don't leave the yard. But there's something in her voice, a uncertainty she can't quite shake. Maybe it's the way Anthony's ambition feels different from the hunger she remembers in herself. Maybe it's the nagging feeling that she's missing something crucial. That evening, Antonia sits in her small apartment 20 miles from base, surrounded by boxes she's never unpacked since Marcus died. One box sits open on her kitchen table, letters, documents, and post-it notes covered in her late husband's careful handwriting. Names, dates, military installations, phone numbers with country codes she doesn't recognize. She picks up one letter, Marcus's voice echoing in her memory as she reads his words about networks and assets and information that never officially existed. Her fingers trace the paper, like she's trying to absorb his secrets through touch. "What did you leave me, Mark?" she whispers to the empty room. She doesn't know it yet, but those boxes contain the keys to an intelligence network that reaches from Norfolk to Naples, from San Diego to Seoul. A web of contacts and information that will either save her career or end it. The next morning, Anthony appears at her office door with a woman Antonia's never seen before. She's elegant in that controlled way that speaks of finishing schools and diplomatic families. Her handshake is firm, her smile perfect, and her eyes measure everything in the room like she's calculating its worth. "Ma'am, I'd like you to meet my wife, Elena Ward." Antonia shakes the woman's hand, noting the wedding ring that catches the light like captured stars. But it's the shoes that make her paws European leather, probably Italian, with the kind of price tag that should be impossible on a junior officer's salary. Elena's voice carries just the faintest accent, something European that she's worked hard to smooth away. "Anthony speaks of you constantly, Lieutenant. He says you've been like family to him." Family. The word hits Antonia in the chest like a physical blow. "Just doing my job," Antonia replies. But something cold settles in her stomach, a wrinkle in the perfect picture Anthony's painted for her. That afternoon, she sits in her office with Anthony's security clearance request spread across her desk. The pen feels heavy in her hand, like she's about to sign something more significant than paperwork. Dee appears in her doorway, coffee in hand and concern in her eyes. "You sure about this, Tony? Something feels off about that boy." Antonia looks at the signature line, then at the photo of Anthony attached to his file. That hungry smile, those ambitious eyes, the way he looked when she called him kid. The kid deserves a shot. The pen touches paper. Black ink flows across white space. Anthony hails fate and her own clicks into place, like bullets sliding into a chamber. She doesn't know it yet, but she's just armed the man who will try to destroy everything she's spent 30 years building. The mentorship that felt like love will become the betrayal that nearly breaks her. But Antonia Brooks didn't survive 3 decades in the Navy by being fragile. When Anthony Hale finally shows his true colors, she'll be ready. Because strays don't just leave the yard. Sometimes they bite the hand that fed them. And when they do, the consequences are permanent. The first crack appears at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Petty Officer Janice Monroe, everyone calls her J-Mo, has the kind of sharp eyes that catch details other people miss. She's been monitoring the Seashade data vault for 18 months, and she knows every ping, every login, every digital fingerprint like sheet music. Tonight, something's off. Lieutenant Brooks, J-Mo, calls across the dim computer lab, her voice cutting through the hum of servers. "We've got late-night terminal activity routing through a dummy account. Looks like system lag, but..." Antonia looks up from her reports, fatigue weighing on her shoulders like lead. "But what, J-Mo?" But the timestamp doesn't match the logout sequence. Someone's been clever about covering tracks. Antonia waves it off with the casual confidence of someone who's seen 1,000 false alarms. Probably just network hiccups. Flag it in the morning report. But at 3 a.m., when the base is quiet except for security patrols and insomniacs, Antonia finds herself back in the data vault. Her fingers fly across the keyboard, pulling up access logs and terminal histories. The numbers don't lie. Someone with high-level clearance has been accessing missile specifications outside normal duty hours. The digital breadcrumbs lead in circles, professionally scrubbed but not perfectly. Her chest tightens like a fist closing around her heart. 3 days later, she's ladling mashed potatoes at Street Mary's community dinner, trying to lose herself in the simple rhythm of service. The church basement smells like gravy and hope, filled with families from the base and neighborhood kids, who know her as the lady who always saves extra dessert. Her sister Lorraine appears at her elbow, sharp-tongued as always. "You know, Tony, some people might say you've been married to the Navy ever since Marcus died." The words hit like a slap, Antonia keeps spooning potatoes, her voice steady despite the sting. Some people might say you should mind your own business, Lorraine. But it hurts because it's true. For 7 years, the Navy has been her husband, her children, her everything. The sailors she mentors fill the space where family used to be. Maybe that's why she trusted Anthony so completely. Maybe that's why she's blind to what everyone else can see. The next morning, Anthony appears in her office with Elena at his side, both of them glowing with that newlywed happiness that makes single people feel hollow. Elena carries a small wrapped box tied with silk ribbon. "We wanted to thank you properly," Elena says, her accent softer today, more vulnerable. "Anthony tells me you've given him opportunities he never dreamed of." Inside the box is a vintage fountain pen, silver and elegant, with initials that aren't Antonia's engraved on the barrel. It's the kind of gift that costs more than Anthony makes in a month, and it feels wrong in her hands like borrowed clothes. "It's beautiful," Antonia says, tucking it into her desk drawer. "Thank you." But she doesn't use it. Something about the weight of it, the coldness of the metal, makes her skin crawl. That evening, she stops by Street Mary's for evening prayers. Father Riley finds her in the back pew, staring at the crucifix like it might offer answers to questions she's afraid to ask. "You sleeping, Lieutenant?" His Irish accent has softened after 40 years in Virginia, but it still rolls like distant thunder. Antonia's laugh is hollow. "Sleep and I are in a trial separation, Father." "Troubles at work?" "Something like that." She rubs her temples where a headache has been building for days. "What do you do when someone you love might be lying to you?" Father Riley settles beside her, his presence solid and comforting. "You pray for wisdom, and you prepare for the truth to hurt." 2 weeks later, the hairline crack becomes a canyon. JMO's voice carries across the data vault with the urgency of someone who's found a smoking gun. "Lieutenant, we have a problem. A microdrive went missing from Terminal 7 for 8 minutes yesterday. Security cam was down for 9. Antonia's blood turns to ice water. "Which terminal?" Anthony Hale's workstation. The ceiling fan in Antonia's office thumps like a failing heartbeat as she stares at the security report. 8 minutes. Long enough to copy terabytes of classified missile specifications. Long enough to sell 30 years of naval supremacy to the highest bidder. Long enough to destroy everything she's built. That night, she finds Anthony at the pier where she first took him to talk about his future. He's staring at the black water like it holds secrets, his uniform wrinkled, and his usual confidence replaced by something that looks suspiciously like guilt. "This promotion," he says without turning around, "it's everything to me, ma'am. I won't let you down." But there's a tremor in his voice, a crack in the foundation of his composure. Antonia has heard that tone before in the voices of sailors caught between honor and desperation, between loyalty and survival. "Anthony," she says carefully, "is everything all right at home? With Elena?" He turns then, and for a moment his mask slips completely. She sees fear in his eyes, raw and desperate. The fear of a man who's made choices he can't unmake. "Everything's fine, ma'am. Better than fine. Elena and we're talking about starting a family, maybe buying a house in Europe after my next rotation." Europe. The word hangs between them like a curse. Antonia nods slowly, filing away every word, every gesture, every tell. "That sounds wonderful, son. You deserve happiness." But as she walks away, leaving Anthony alone with the dark water and his darker secrets, she's already calculating her next move. Because the woman who survived 3 decades in the Navy didn't get there by ignoring red flags or hoping for the best. The ceiling fan in her apartment thumps through the night as she sits at her kitchen table, surrounded by Marcus's papers and her own growing certainty. Anthony Hale is about to learn that betrayal has consequences. And Antonia Brooks is about to teach him that some lessons are permanent. The storage locker in Queens smells like old paper and forgotten promises. Antonia sits cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by boxes that haven't been opened since Marcus died 7 years ago. Her flashlight beam cuts through dusty air, illuminating handwritten notes in her husband's careful script. At first, the names mean nothing. Sarah Chen, dock supervisor. Miguel Torres, quartermaster 3rd class. Dorothy Williams, who runs the choir at First Baptist, and somehow knows every piece of gossip from Norfolk to Newport News. Then she sees the connections. Marcus didn't just leave behind letters and memories. He left behind a shadow network, an informal intelligence web that spans 3 decades and reaches into every corner of naval operations on the East Coast. The barber with a CIA cousin, the records clerk who escaped the Soviet Union in 1987, the logistics genius who can track a paperclip from requisition to recycling. Her husband built an empire of quiet watchers, and now it belongs to her. 2 days later, she slides into a corner booth at Mel's Diner on Hampton Boulevard, where the coffee tastes like motor oil and the waitress calls everyone honey. Across from her sits Abraham Mendel, 73 years old, with eyes sharp enough to count rivets on a submarine hull. Uncle Abe ran Navy logistics for 30 years before retiring to a fishing boat and a pension that barely covers bait. But his mind still works like a supercomputer, tracking supply chains and personnel movements with the precision of a Swiss watch. Marcus never told me he had a network, Antonia says, sliding a manila folder across the table. Abe glances at the names and locations, his weathered face creasing into something between admiration and concern. Your husband was careful about compartmentalization. We all knew pieces, never the whole puzzle. I need surveillance on 2 people. Quiet. Legal. Traceable through proper channels. Abe's laugh sounds like gravel in a cement mixer. You gonna pay me in Navy coins and guilt? Half right. Within 48 hours, the network activates like a sleeping giant opening its eyes. Dorothy Williams mentions to her bridge club that the young naval officer's wife has been asking about European travel agencies. Miguel Torres notes unusual requisition patterns for encrypted communications equipment. Sarah Chen observes late-night meetings at the pier between Anthony and a woman who isn't his wife. Antonia's apartment wall becomes a constellation of post-it notes and red string, mapping relationships and movements with the methodical precision of a chess grandmaster planning her endgame. She refuses to break a single military regulation. Every piece of information flows through legitimate channels. Every surveillance operation happens within legal bounds. If Anthony is going to fall, it will be by the book and bulletproof. But barely legal is still legal. Lieutenant Willa Kane sits in a van outside the Marriott on Military Circle, wearing civilian clothes and using equipment that officially doesn't exist. Willa was one of Antonia's first mentees, a signals specialist with the kind of technical skills that make admirals nervous and enemy operatives disappear. Through high-powered surveillance equipment, they watch Elena Hale, Anthony's supposedly devoted wife, walk into the hotel restaurant and embrace a man who looks like he stepped out of a Moscow business magazine. Travel consultant, my ass, Willa mutters, adjusting the frequency to catch their conversation through the restaurant's windows. The audio comes through static and scratchy, but certain phrases cut through clear as gunshots. Window closes in June. Payment confirmed through Zurich. Documents are authentic, verified by our technical team. Antonia's blood turns to ice water in her veins. June is 2 months away. 2 months to stop Anthony from selling 30 years of naval supremacy to Russian intelligence. 2 months to save the country from her own mistake and judgment. That night, she returns to the storage locker in Queens, following a map Marcus drew on the back of a grocery receipt. Behind a stack of Christmas decorations and tax returns from 1998, she finds a small safe built into the wall. The combination is their wedding anniversary. Inside, along with important papers and a stack of silver dollars from his father, she finds a plain white envelope with her name written in Marcus's handwriting. Below her name, in smaller letters, "For the day you're tired of fare." The envelope weighs almost nothing in her hands, but it feels heavy as lead. She knows without opening it that whatever's inside will change everything. That Marcus, even in death, understood there might come a day when playing by the rules wouldn't be enough. When being fair and honorable and decent would be a luxury she couldn't afford. She sits in the dusty silence of the storage locker, holding her dead husband's final gift, and thinks about Anthony's trembling voice at the pier, about Elena's expensive shoes and perfect smile, about missile specifications that could shift the balance of power in 3 oceans, about the fact that sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from themselves. The envelope stays sealed for now, but she takes it with her, sliding it into her jacket pocket, like a loaded weapon she hopes she'll never need to use. Because Lieutenant Antonia Brooks still believes in justice over vengeance, in fair play over dirty tricks. She still believes that the system can work if good people fight hard enough to make it work. But she's also learning that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who force you to make impossible choices. And sometimes being tired of fair is the only thing that keeps you alive. The Shadow Network watches and waits. June is coming, and Anthony Hale has no idea that his carefully constructed world is about to come crashing down around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The envelope in her pocket feels warm against her ribs, pulsing like a second heartbeat, waiting for the day she finally gets tired of playing by rules that don't apply to everyone. Sometimes the best trap is the one that looks like an opportunity. Antonia sits in the pier-side warehouse at 0500 hours, watching J-Mo prepare what they're calling a honey file, a decoy packet of missile specifications that contains just enough real information to look authentic, but enough false data to destroy any weapon system built from its blueprints. Every digital file is tagged with an invisible tracer, a piece of code so elegant it would make Silicon Valley programmers weep with envy. "You sure about this, Lieutenant?" J-Mo asks, her fingers dancing across the keyboard like a concert pianist. "Once this goes live, there's no taking it back." Antonia stares through the warehouse windows at the gray Atlantic, where submarines patrol like metal sharks beneath the waves. "Sometimes you have to give someone enough rope to hang themselves, J-Mo." Chief D. Crawford appears in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee that smell like they could strip paint. She's been watching Antonia plan this operation for weeks, and the concern in her eyes is deeper than Norfolk Harbor. "You really gonna let the kid cook himself?" Dee asks, settling into a metal chair that creaks under her weight. Antonia accepts the coffee, savoring the bitter burn. "I'm just turning up the kitchen light." But there's no satisfaction in her voice, no joy in the hunt. Because even though Anthony betrayed everything she taught him about loyalty and honor, part of her still sees the hungry kid from Charleston who lit up when she called him son. The trap springs faster than she expected. Within 48 hours, surveillance footage shows Anthony accessing Terminal 7 outside normal duty hours. The honey file disappears for 12 minutes, just long enough to copy onto an encrypted drive that matches the specifications Elena received from her Russian handlers. The digital tracer activates like a beacon in the dark, broadcasting Anthony's exact location to every intelligence agency with the right equipment. At 0347 hours on a Thursday morning, 2 military police officers find Anthony in the base parking lot, climbing into his car with a briefcase full of classified documents that officially don't exist. His face goes white as fresh snow when they call his name. The fall from grace happens faster than a submarine dive. Anthony is stripped of his security clearance, suspended pending investigation, and forbidden from setting foot on base property. His bank accounts are frozen, his movements restricted, and his future reduced to a series of legal proceedings that could end with him spending the rest of his life in a federal prison cell. Elena disappears like smoke and wind. Within a week, Anthony discovers that his perfect wife has emptied their joint accounts, maxed out credit cards in his name, and left him with debts to people who don't accept late payments or excuses. The elegant woman who called him darling and bought expensive fountain pens turns out to be as real as the love letters written in disappearing ink. The Russian intelligence handler known as Volga makes it clear that failed assets are liabilities, and liabilities have a way of disappearing permanently. Anthony Hale, the rising star who thought he could play both sides and win, finds himself alone in a world that suddenly has no use for him. The rain falls like bullets on the neon signs outside Sunset Lane's bowling alley, casting everything in shades of red and blue that make the night look like a crime scene. Antonia emerges from her car to find Anthony waiting by the entrance, soaked to the skin and hollow-eyed as a ghost. "Don't bury me," he says without preamble, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Please, I know I messed up, but don't bury me." Antonia studies his face in the neon light, seeing the boy she mentored and the man who betrayed her overlapping like double-exposed photographs. Rain drips from his hair onto shoulders that used to carry themselves with military precision. "I gave you my name in rooms that didn't want you," she says quietly, each word deliberate as a chess move. "I vouched for you with people who trust me with their lives. You sold all of that for a faster line to nowhere." Anthony's shoulders shake, and she can't tell if it's from the cold rain or something deeper. "I was trying to build something for us. For Elena and me. I thought I could play it smart, take what I needed without really hurting anything. There's no such thing as a little betrayal, son. It's like being a little pregnant. Either you are or you aren't." The silence stretches between them like an ocean. Finally, Anthony speaks again, his voice barely audible over the rain. "What happens now?" Antonia considers him for a long moment, thinking of the young man who reminded her of herself, the ambitious sailor who wanted more than the world was willing to give him freely. "You learn," she says finally. "Graveyard shift at the armory, midnight to 8, guarding the weapons you thought you could trade for a better life." It's the kind of assignment that breaks careers and spirits, isolated, humbling work that forces a person to face what they've become in the quiet hours when the rest of the world sleeps. Anthony nods slowly, understanding that this is mercy disguised as punishment. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the chance." That night, alone in her apartment, Antonia finally opens Marcus's envelope with hands that tremble slightly from exhaustion and grief. Inside is a black leather notebook filled with her husband's careful handwriting, documenting real vulnerabilities in the Sea-Shade missile system, security flaws, technical weaknesses, and bureaucratic blind spots that could compromise national security if left unchecked. At the bottom of the last page, Marcus's final message to his wife. "Use this to fix what they won't admit is broken. The system only works when good people fight to make it work. I love you. Make them better." Antonia closes the notebook and exhales like she's been underwater for years, finally surfacing to breathe free air. Anthony thought he was stealing secrets to build a future. He had no idea he was just the pawn in a much larger game, one where his betrayal would ultimately make the Navy stronger, the country safer, and justice something more than just a word carved in marble. The real mission is just beginning. At 2 a.m, the armory is quieter than a tomb. Anthony sits on a metal stool between rows of locked weapon cabinets, his uniform wrinkled from 3 weeks of midnight shifts. The fluorescent lights hum overhead like angry wasps, casting everything in harsh white that makes his skin look gray as old concrete. When Antonia appears in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, he doesn't look up from the logbook he's been pretending to read. "Ma'am," he says quietly, his voice hoarse from shame and sleepless nights. She settles into a chair across from him, noting how he's lost weight, how his hands shake slightly when he reaches for the coffee. The golden boy who charmed his way through officer training looks like a man who's aged 10 years in 3 weeks. "Tell me everything," she says simply. The confession pours out of him like water through a broken dam. The late-night meetings with Elena's Russian handlers in hotel bars across Virginia Beach, the encrypted drives and Swiss bank accounts, the promises of a new life in Europe, where his betrayal would be rewarded with rank and respect. "They said I could have everything," Anthony whispers, staring into the black coffee like it might hold absolution. "A house in Switzerland, a commission in their navy. Elena told me we could disappear, start fresh where nobody knew what I'd done." Antonia watches him shake as the truth spills out names, locations, drop points, everything he's been carrying alone for months. The weight of his betrayal has been eating him alive from the inside. "The worst part is," he continues, his voice breaking, "I didn't think anyone would ever bet on me the way you did. My whole life, people saw potential problems, not potential. You saw something in me I didn't even see in myself. She pours more coffee into his paper cup, the gesture simple and maternal despite everything between them. This is Navy coffee, she says with a dry smile. It'll forgive sins if you let it. For the first time in weeks, Anthony laughs. It's a broken sound, more sob than humor, but it's real. Ma'am, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any way to make this right? Antonia studies his face in the harsh fluorescent light, seeing the boy she mentored overlapping with the man who betrayed her. The calculation she's been making for weeks finally crystallizes into a plan. 3 days later, she sits across from Commander Miriam Cho in a secure conference room, Marcus's black notebook between them, like evidence in a murder trial. You're proposing a deal, Cho says, her voice carefully neutral. I'm proposing a solution. Antonia's tone carries the authority of 3 decades in uniform. I retrieve the real stolen documents using my assets. We purge the Honeyfile trail to keep Seashade from becoming a political nightmare. Anthony cooperates fully with debriefing. Cho leans back, studying Antonia with the respect one professional gives another. And in return? The Navy fixes every vulnerability Marcus documented. No bureaucratic delays, no budget meetings, no committees. Real security improvements that keep our people and our secrets safe. It's the kind of deal that gets made in shadows between women who understand that results matter more than glory. No congressional hearings, no media coverage, no admiral taking credit for solving a crisis he didn't know existed. Just 2 professionals cleaning up a mess and making sure it never happens again. Anthony Hale remains under military jurisdiction, Cho says finally. No civilian prosecution, but he serves out his commitment under restrictions. Agreed. They shake hands across the table like CEOs closing a merger that will reshape an industry. That evening, Antonia sits at her kitchen table with Father Riley, drafting what she's calling the Security Through Loyalty Training Protocol. It's a mentorship program designed for troubled sailors, young women and men who remind her of herself at their age, hungry and desperate, and willing to do almost anything for a chance to prove their worth. You're turning your pain into protection, Father Riley observes, reading over her shoulder. Marcus would be proud. Marcus would want me to make sure this never happens to another family. She adds another line to the curriculum outline. These kids need to know that loyalty isn't just a word you say at ceremonies. It's a choice you make every day. The next morning, Anthony appears at her office door with a request that surprises no one except him. I want to volunteer for the document retrieval mission, he says without preamble. I know where Elena and her handlers are planning to transfer the files. I know their protocols, their backup plans, their escape routes. Antonia looks up from her reports, studying his face for signs of deception or desperation. What she sees instead is something she recognizes from her own mirror, the look of someone trying to pay down a debt that can never really be settled. It's dangerous, Anthony. These people kill assets who become liabilities. Yes, ma'am. I understand. You could die. Better than living with what I've done. His voice carries a conviction she hasn't heard since before. Elena poisoned his ambitions with promises of easy money. Antonia considers him for a long moment, thinking of second chances and redemption missions and the fine line between justice and mercy. You go under my command, she says finally. My operation, my rules, my call on every decision. Anthony straightens to attention for the first time in weeks. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the chance to make it right. But as he leaves her office, Antonia stares at Marcus's photograph on her desk and wonders if she's giving Anthony a chance at redemption or simply a more honorable way to die for his mistakes. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The mission launches in 72 hours. Rain slicks the cargo pier near Baltimore like black paint on metal. At 0200 hours, the freighter Kronos sits heavy in the water, flying a Russian flag of convenience and carrying more than grain in its cargo holds. Antonia Brooks moves through the shadows like a ghost with 30 years of combat training, her team spread across the pier in a choreographed dance of precision and silence. This isn't Hollywood heroics. This is disciplined professionals doing what they've trained their entire lives to do. Anthony Hale follows 10 feet behind her, his breathing controlled despite the terror that's been eating at his gut for 72 hours. He knows this might be the last night of his life, but for the first time in months, he's exactly where he's supposed to be. Lieutenant Willa Kane's voice crackles through their earpieces from the overwatch position. Thermal shows 4 hostiles on deck, 2 below. Target container is Bravo 7, starboard side. Chief D. Crawford moves like liquid death along the pier's edge. Close support for a woman who's been her battle buddy since they were both young enough to think they were bulletproof. "You owe me a pedicure after this," Dee whispers through comms, her voice tight with controlled adrenaline. Antonia's response carries the ghost of a smile, too, with sparkles. But the easy banter dies as they reach the ship's hull and discover the first complication. The stolen Seashade documents aren't just paper files hidden in a briefcase. The intelligence has been encoded onto a data key that's been physically woven into a ballast sensor casing deep in the ship's hull. Extraction will require time they don't have and tools they didn't bring. New plan. Antonia breathes into her mic, her mind calculating angles and probabilities like a human computer. "Anthony, you know their protocols. Where's the backup?" Anthony's voice shakes slightly, but his intelligence remains sharp. Volga keeps a duplicate in his personal safe. Stateroom 3, behind the Pushkin portrait, old-school spycraft. As if summoned by his name, the Russian handler emerges from the shadows 50 yards away, flanked by armed men who move with the fluid precision of Spetsnaz operatives. Volga's voice carries across the water with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Lieutenant Brooks, we have been expecting you." The night explodes into chaos. Muzzle flashes strobe like deadly lightning across the pier. Antonia's team scatters with practiced efficiency, each member moving to predetermined positions that turn the open pier into a maze of crossfires and kill zones. Anthony breaks from the group without orders, sprinting toward the ship's catwalk in a move that looks suicidal but serves a purpose only Antonia understands. He's drawing the shooters away from her team, making himself the primary target while she moves toward the real objective. "Kid, what are you doing?" Dee snarls through comms. But Antonia sees the strategy in Anthony's sacrifice. "Let him run. He's buying us the opening we need." Bullets spark off metal railings as Anthony scrambles up the ship's external ladder, his knowledge of the vessel's layout guiding him through a maze of containers and equipment. Behind him, 2 Russian operatives give chase, their automatic weapons chattering in the night. Anthony reaches the catwalk and turns, firing 3 precise shots that drop one pursuer and send the other diving for cover. In that moment of purchased time, he spots the real prize Volga himself, clutching a waterproof case that contains the authentic Seashade documents. "Antonia!" Anthony gasps into his mic, blood seeping from a graze across his ribs. "Main deck, port side. He's got the real files." But the words cost him. As he turns to move, a sniper's bullet catches him center mass, spinning him against the catwalk railing with an impact that sounds like a sledgehammer hitting meat. Anthony Hale falls toward the dark water, his body crashing onto the pier with a sound that cuts through the gunfire like a blade through silk. Antonia moves like a woman possessed, her 63-year-old body flowing with the deadly grace of someone who never forgot how to be lethal. She reaches Volga's position as he tries to escape toward a waiting speedboat, the waterproof case clutched against his chest like a life preserver. The confrontation lasts 15 seconds. When it's over, Volga floats face down in Baltimore Harbor, and the case is in Antonia's hands. "Exfil now," Commander Cho's voice crackles through the comms from the coordination point. "Local authorities en route, ETA 6 minutes." Willa's heartbeat returns to something approaching normal as she guides the team through their escape route. Dee provides rear guard while Antonia and the precious intelligence slip into the river, where an unmarked Navy vessel waits to carry them back to Norfolk. The mission is a complete success. The authentic Seashade documents are recovered, the Russian intelligence network is compromised, and America's naval supremacy remains intact. But victory tastes like ashes when Antonia kneels beside Anthony's body on the rain-soaked pier. He's still breathing. Barely. His uniform dark with blood and his eyes struggling to focus on her face. The boy who reminded her of herself, who she loved like a son, who betrayed everything she taught him about honor and loyalty. "Tell them," he whispers, each word costing him blood he can't spare. "Tell them I wasn't all bad." Antonia takes his dog tags as the light fades from his eyes, the metal warm from his body heat and slick with rain. She doesn't cry. Not yet. There will be time for grief later, when the debriefing is complete and the after-action reports are filed. Right now, she has work to finish. Anthony Hale died trying to pay a debt that could never really be settled. But in those final moments, sprinting through gunfire to give his team the intelligence they needed, he remembered what it meant to be a sailor. Sometimes redemption doesn't mean living with your mistakes. Sometimes it means dying to fix them. The rain continues to fall on the dark water, washing away the evidence of a mission that officially never happened. 6 months later, the same secured conference room where this story began. Antonia sits across from Commander Cho, but the atmosphere has changed completely. Where tension once crackled between them like electricity, now there's the calm professionalism of two women who've accomplished something that will never appear in any official history book. "Operation Clean Slate," Antonia says simply, sliding Marcus's black notebook across the polished table. Every vulnerability he documented has been addressed. Every security flaw patched. The Seashade program is now bulletproof. Cho opens the notebook, scanning pages of technical improvements and policy changes that represent 18 months of quiet reform. No congressional hearings, no media attention, no admirals taking credit for solving problems they never knew existed. And Anthony's record? Shows cooperation with a classified national security operation. His final service evaluation reflects valor in the line of duty. Antonia's voice carries no emotion, just the facts. The worst of his betrayal remains sealed to protect ongoing operations and maintain program integrity. Lieutenant Commander Ortega enters the room with the subdued manner of a man who's learned some hard lessons about trust and oversight. He signs the final authorization forms without comment, understanding that his career survived only because Antonia chose strategy over exposure. The Brooks Initiative launches next week, Antonia continues. Security training and mentorship pipeline for at-risk female sailors. Financial literacy, intelligence awareness, and leadership development. Everything Anthony needed but never got. She nods slowly. "You're turning your pain into protection. I'm making sure this never happens to another family." That evening, Antonia sits alone in the chapel at St. Mary's, staring at the crucifix while tears she's held back for months finally come. They fall like rain on drought, cracked earth brief, brutal, and private. Father Riley appears long enough to place a box of tissues on the pew beside her, then disappears with the wisdom of someone who understands that grief needs space to breathe. She cries for the boy from Charleston who reminded her of herself. She cries for the son she chose, who chose betrayal over loyalty. She cries for Marcus, whose death left her unmoored, and for the family she built that nearly destroyed her. But mostly, she cries because justice without mercy feels hollow, and mercy without justice feels weak, and finding the balance between them nearly broke her. 2 weeks later, the community hall at Naval Station Norfolk buzzes with the energy of new beginnings. 23 young women in crisp dress blues sit in neat rows, their faces bright, with the kind of hope that comes from someone believing in your potential. These are the sailors everyone else gave up on, the ones with complicated histories and complicated families, who joined the Navy because they had nowhere else to go and everything to prove. They're exactly like Antonia was at their age. Chief D. Crawford approaches the podium with a plaque in her hands, grinning like she's about to embarrass her best friend in front of God and everybody. "Ladies, I present to you Lieutenant Antonia Brooks, founder of the Brooks Initiative and living proof that persistence beats pretty every damn day." She hands Antonia the plaque, which reads simply, "Permanent, not petty." Antonia shakes her head, fighting a smile. "You're insufferable." And punctual, Dee fires back. Don't forget punctual. The graduates laugh, and for the first time in months, Antonia feels something approaching peace. These young women will face the same temptations Anthony faced, the same pressures and promises and shortcuts that destroyed him. But they'll face them with better training, stronger support, and the knowledge that someone believes they're worth the investment. As the ceremony ends, Antonia walks alone to the pier, where she first talked to Anthony about his future. The sun rises over Norfolk Harbor, painting the water gold and silver, and the submarines cutting through the waves look like hope itself moving through dark water. She pulls Marcus's wedding ring from the chain around her neck, kisses the warm metal, and tucks it safely inside her uniform jacket, close to her heart, where it belongs. Betrayal will empty a room, she says to the sunrise, her voice carrying across the water. Strategy will fill it again, this time with the right people. A group of new recruits jogs past on the pier, their cadence chant echoing off the water. Their rhythm is slightly off, their voices not quite in sync. Without thinking, Antonia falls into step beside them, her voice clear and strong as she calls out the beat. The recruits straighten, their voices growing stronger as they match her cadence. Sound off 1, 2. Sound off 3, 4. Her voice is seasoned by 30 years of service, weathered by loss and betrayal, but unbroken. It carries the authority of someone who's seen the worst humanity has to offer and still believes in the best. The recruits jog past, their chant fading into the morning air, but Antonia remains at the pier. She's lighter now, the weight of Anthony's betrayal finally processed and transformed into something useful. The Brooks Initiative will train thousands of sailors over the coming years. It will prevent betrayals, strengthen loyalty, and turn potential problems into permanent solutions. And somewhere in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that smells like sea, air, and ambition, a young woman is making the decision to join the Navy. She'll arrive at Norfolk in 6 months, with hungry eyes and everything to prove. When she does, Antonia will be waiting. Because that's what permanent looks like. That's what real revenge looks like. Not destruction, but creation. Not tearing down, but building up. Not ending careers, but starting new ones with better foundations. I don't do petty. I do permanent. And permanent means making sure the next generation is stronger, smarter, and more loyal than the one that came before. The sun climbs higher over Norfolk Harbor, and Lieutenant Antonia Brooks walks back to base with work to do and people to save. The mission continues.